neurodivergent weirdos and queers who forget about struggling to adult. They're struggling to human.
At least that's what everyone's telling us.
You're right.
Per usual. But seriously, I'm Angela. People call me Mama Pistachio, bringing sense to the conversation. I help individuals and organizations cultivate skills, spaces, and confidence to advocate for themselves and each other.
And I'm Molly, giving a big fork you to cookie cutter solutions. I help busy as fuck neurodivergent entrepreneurs make shit happen by bringing stability to their businesses while helping them do what makes sense to their brain.
Enough with the chit chat. Let's get down to business. What's the frickin' point?
With our powers combined, we navigate life through the drudgery, dreams, and all that shit in between. Plus, we were already having these conversations anyway, so why not record them, right?
Alrighty then. Get ready to call bullshit on what everyone's saying you should be doing as we navigate the spectrum between what your heart wants and the shit keeping you from it.
Hey! Oh my gosh. We're live! It works!
Woohoo!
Woo! All right. We're here for episode 2. Yes. And so thank you everybody who listened last week or to last week's episode. We really appreciate it. And we're super excited to be here today because we're talking about all things neurodivergent and queerness. And it's a very exciting conversation. So,
yes, it is.
yeah.
Because it is Bisexual Awareness, I'd prefer to say Acceptance Week. And then the 23rd is Bisexual Visibility Day.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about our queerness today because, I mean, why not?
I mean, because it's who we are. We're really big on like making sure everybody understands who we are. So, yes. So, Angela, I have never heard how, like, I've never heard your story about
What?
your queerness. I mean, like, I know that you're queer and I know how that lays out, but like, I've never, like, I've heard bits and pieces, but I've never actually
We've never had that conversation. Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
2 years.
I don't,
never.
I know. Well, I guess for me, I don't think that there are a lot of stops and starts, but there's not a like big, revelation or anything. As a kid, I just flat out did not understand what it meant to not be able to love whoever. That just, it never made sense to me. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the things that were coming out of the mouths of people around me. Like, why are you saying that about that person? And why is that bad? And it just never made any kind of sense to me. And I just liked who I liked. When did I know that I like anybody? I like the first boy that I loved was like seriously first grade. Okay. The first girl that I loved was 6th grade. And I was like madly in love with her. I would have married this girl. Like, I would have had a family. Like, she was my best friend. She never, we had conversations, but it just never, she didn't get it. Like, she just didn't get it. And so I did not have the flat out, like, I'm going to sit you down. Like, there was a lot of fear. I came from a really small town, and there was just so much fear around all of that. She didn't care that I like everybody. She just didn't get that she was my main attraction. Like, and she was my best friend for the longest time. And then I was in my 30s, and she and I were on the phone with my cousin. I lived in Montreal at the time. And he says to her, he's like, after all of these years, you still don't get it. And he just like, he was just being protective. I don't know, but he just like laid into her and told her.
Woo.
And she was like, I'm sorry, I would have tried. um, I haven't spoken to her in years though. Now, like when I divorced, that didn't make her happy.
Oh.
And, you know, things happen. So that, I mean, that's all part of my story.
Okay.
When I had cancer, when I was 35, so I'll be 11 years cancer free this November. Woo woo. That was when I was like, I'm not like, I am who I am. I'm who I'm going to be, and I'm going to stop pretending otherwise to make other people feel comfortable. So that's when the conversation started happening, but I don't know, it just doesn't automatically pop up to me to have that conversation. I remember when like having a meeting, you were there with Heather one day, and I was like blah 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 blah, and I'm queer and my clients, and she's like, "What?" Like, how am I your coach? Yeah. How am I your coach and I don't know that you're queer?
Yeah. Same conversation happened with me and her as well.
And I guess,
like, oh, okay.
Because to me, it wasn't like I need to be telling everybody all of the time. You know, like heterosexuals don't walk around and go, I'm heterosexual, I'm heterosexual, I'm heterosexual. Yeah. But then the more we started having conversations, the more I was like, I do need to be having this conversation out loud.
Yeah.
For all of the reasons. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I mean,
yeah,
there's so much more, but
yeah, and I think
that's the
funny.
nutshell.
Okay. I think it's funny because we talk about all the parallels in our lives a lot, but mine's similar. Like, I had all the crushes on all the Disney princesses, and like all, you know, like, or Xena Warrior Princess.
Oh, hello.
You know, like, and like, so all those things growing up, and I do remember like the first time I kissed a girl, and I went, it's really no different. Like, I just remember that thought. Like, it was the moment of like, and I feel bad because I was like, I was not into this specific person who kissed me, which I felt bad about. But at the same time, it was like, it's no different. Like, I don't like her that specific person that way, but it really isn't any different. And I remember that kind of moment. But other than that, I've always liked girls more than boys. I just didn't.
So
I think I'm actually more scared to tell girls that I have a crush on them than I am guys because it's conventional. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I remember being madly in love with several best friends, and just like, and some of them were queer, but they were in relationships, and I didn't want to like mess up that dynamic. And so I just like on the sidelines would like be the third wheel.
Right.
You know, like, awkwardly be there.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I mean, but in reality, there's no like true coming out of it. It's just always been there. Okay, but let's go on to the things that you prepared.
Okay, we can in just a minute, but I have to say, I use the queer label. I used the bisexual label for a long time because that's what was there.
Right.
But I use the queer label now because I understand that there is this fluidity, not only with my sexuality, or not only with my orientation, but with my whole sexuality, my gender, my expression, my likes and dislikes, like all of the sexuality, not just one piece. And for me, when it really comes down to it, I like an androgynous kind of, like, this is what I really, really, really am physically attracted to.
Yes.
So when I'm happiest, like with my husband, the other day, he was like, "You love me because I'm feminine." Now, most people wouldn't necessarily take a look at him, like when he's, got a beard and all of that stuff, but he doesn't now, obviously, being in the military. But,
Yeah.
He's got that dark, like Italian 5 o'clock shadow and all of that stuff going on. And people wouldn't necessarily think that appearance wise, that there was any feminine aspect or quality to this person. But we joke that I definitely have more of the traditional masculine tendencies, whereas he has more of the traditional feminine tendencies, which is so funny. But I think that's an important conversation to have too. It's not just boys and girls. It's like human beings are this huge spectrum of stuff. And just because somebody appears some way on the outside doesn't mean that they don't have this quality of being human about them, and that it's those qualities that a lot of us are attracted to, not necessarily just like a physical appearance.
Yeah.
But if I'm basing it just on a physical appearance, it's usually going to be Adam Lambert. Like, it's going to be this, there's going to be this certain amount of androgyny. There's going to be, anybody who's watched The L Word, Shane is like, like the perfect representation of what I find physically attractive.
Yes. Mine is Ruby Rose. So.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
I love that. So why does this matter? Why do we care? Why are we having this conversation? Not just because it's Bisexual Awareness Acceptance Week, but one of the things, and this is one of the things that kind of led me to getting a diagnosis, right?
Yes.
Is there seems to be, there's not a lot of studies on it, but there seems to be a connection or a higher prevalence of queerness and gender fluidity, gender nonconforming, transgender, and autism. There seems to be some kind of a connection. Do people know what it is? No, they do not. But they're starting to look at it and trying to understand, because it matters to our health and the care that we get when we go to the doctor, that those two things are acknowledged, and that our physicians, the people who are taking care of us, are informed. So it matters.
Yes.
And that's really why we want to have this conversation today.
Yes. Oh, so many things to like rabbit hole into from that.
Right.
I'm like, where to go next?
Right.
And you and I had kind of, so before episodes, Angela and I have like pre-episode chats. And so like we can figure out like, oh, we could talk about this and that. And when we were kind of brainstorming this, we were talking, I brought up the androgen situation. So I have PCOS, and I was reading an article about how a lot of people with PCOS are gender fluid. And that article was talking about how the hormone levels are different because the androgens, that like I have an excessive amount of testosterone. So, I mean, makes sense. Like from a scientific, like, oh, okay, that's why I like this thing than this thing, because I have more like testosterone in my body. Got it. Sure. But that doesn't dictate anything. Necessarily, I should say. It doesn't necessarily dictate anything. But
Right.
I was watching a TikTok yesterday about the prefrontal cortex. It was actually in relation to children. It was protecting trans youth conversation, and how we assume that the prefrontal cortex has to do with being able to properly process a situation.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, it was a neuroscientist saying, no, the prefrontal cortex actually is impulse control.
Right.
Or your ability to conform to societal standards, because then you know what the societal standard is and you are choosing to fit in. Whereas
Right.
children who have a not fully developed prefrontal cortex are authentically themselves as much as possible, because that's how their brain functions. And it was talking about how kids, if they are like, that's why it's saying like between 3 and 5, that's when they fully know their identity as a human. Right. And I was just like, oh, but that could also make sense. You might know more than me on this one. Is there a correlation between prefrontal cortex development and autism?
So, I would have to look specifically on that. However, we know that being autistic means that your brain processes things differently. There have been some studies and MRIs and all of this thing, but it's not specifically like one.
Right.
There is not one specific thing. And that's what I hope that people listening today understand, that there is not one specific thing. Like, is there a connection or a link, or are we seeing some scientific kind of thing between PCOS and queerness, PCOS and autism? So I found a study. There was a study that was done in the UK. They were testing the hypothesis that PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, is linked with autism. Because both conditions are associated with elevated prenatal testosterone levels. Okay. Now, elevated prenatal testosterone levels is not the cause of autism.
No.
Studies are being done to understand links, but that doesn't mean that there's a fault. It doesn't mean that there's a problem. It doesn't mean that something needs to be cured. None of that stuff.
No.
But this study, they did 3 different case controls, and to test the hypothesis. So ultimately, at the end of it, so study 1, the authors found that a significantly higher percentage of women with autism were diagnosed with PCOS than the controls. So 2.3% versus 1.1%. So that is significant.
Yeah.
In study 2, autism was almost 2 times more prevalent in PCOS cases than in controls. So 0.1% versus 0.05%. And then in study 3, they looked at mothers with PCOS and their firstborn child. And there was a tiny, 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 I think insignificant result that said if you have PCOS, you have a higher odds of having a child, an autistic child, than somebody without PCOS. However, let me say, and they do acknowledge this in the article, that there is not enough anything there to say that's a case. And they are not saying that there is a cause, and they are not saying that women with PCOS, people with PCOS, should not be having children because it is a cause of. Um, right. There is none of
Right.
that there. And I like to make that very, very clear because
Yeah.
sometimes people latch onto something and they're like, oh, here's this. But as an autistic person, like there's not something, I'm not defective. I
No.
don't have anything that needs to be cured. Learning that I'm autistic has been the most beautiful, wonderful, amazing, freeing thing that has ever happened in my life.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, you and I delve into these things not because we want some like reason to blame or anything like that. We just really find it interesting.
Absolutely.
Like, the science is like, ooh, tell me all the science. I want to know the numbers. Bring me some blood test results about hormones. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not because we want some solution to fix things, because we don't see it as a fix. Like, there is no need for a fix. And yeah, no. So I totally understand why you're caveating all the things, making sure that everybody knows.
Well, I am, because, you know, one of the things that's really, so Lady Gaga has the song Born This Way, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with me. I was born this way. Well, that can be just as harmful a narrative as saying this is a choice, because then you're stealing the choice away from somebody.
Mhm.
Things change. You know, okay, nobody chooses to be autistic or ADHD or any of those things. Nobody chooses that. But we are fluid throughout our lifetimes, and we have different experiences that shape the way that we identify, that we represent ourselves. So I think it's important to not just say, well, science says this, therefore. And we accept, if somebody self-identifies and they have not gone to the doctor and they look at you and they say, I'm autistic, you don't ask them to prove that. I would never ask a diabetic to be like, show me your blood work and tell me what doctor you went to and prove to me that you're diabetic. I would just take their word that they're diabetic.
Mhm.
But there's a big conversation about proving that you're autistic or have ADHD or whatever. And I understand that in certain cases, like to get accommodations and things like that. But then again, it's like there are so many of these accommodations that people are asking for that they don't cost money. They don't need to have proof. It's like, can we just treat people as people? Because whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, it's something that can help you be more productive. So why not do it?
Yeah.
And there was something in my mind that I wanted to add, and it just went pew right out the window.
Oh.
But maybe it'll come back because it was important. It was something very important that I wanted to say, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay. Just interject when it comes back.
Right. I'm going to try to focus on what you're saying, though.
Yeah. Well, and something we talked about yesterday with regard to like neurodivergence. So like technically, I am not diagnosed try that again. I am not diagnosed with ADHD, or I'm not diagnosed autistic either. But I am diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, anxiety, depression, panic disorder, PTSD, like all these other things.
Yeah.
And I remember the day that you were like, that sounds very familiar. And then when you went through your recent diagnosis, you messaged me and you literally read off your diagnosis and it was identical to mine. And we have such
I read off one doctor's diagnosis. Right, because I had to go through multiple doctors because they couldn't agree. We had this traditional we're going to use the test that we use for little white boys, and that's going to be what you get for your testing, even though you're not a little white boy, and it doesn't really,
even though
affect you. Right. And then we have this other doctor who, and then we have this other doctor who takes this more holistic look at the whole thing. And, so that was a whole process. But yeah, it's normal to get, and that reminds me. Okay. It is normal to get a diagnosis that is not accurate for a lot of women and gender nonconforming folks and Black folks and brown folks. And okay, anybody who's not a white cisgender heterosexual male. Like right? Like it's different. It's different for us. Which okay. It's some of the same thing with when someone says I'm bisexual, it's like, no, you're not. There's this whole bi erasure thing happening. It's like, no, you're not. You're not bisexual. You're confused. It's just a phase. You're too scared to come out all the way. You can't be bisexual because you're married to a man. There are all of these things why people want to tell you that you're not.
Yeah.
Including the people who we go to for support, in our medical community. It can happen there as well. And the same thing happens when you go in to get a diagnosis for a variety of neurodivergences. There's this dismissive thing that happens. So when you've got both happening at the same time, there are so many mental health concerns with not just how society in general treats you, but how the medical community treats you, how the institution of education treats you, all of the institutions treat you, right? It's a double whammy. So it's important to be having these conversations.
Yeah.
Because we need a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we need to be able to have that conversation with our doctor without spending our, 15-minute appointment trying to prove something.
Right.
Like
well, and I have so I always go to the doctor and it's part of my coping tactic because I was called a know-it-all as a kid. So I go in and I'm like, so I did my research with Dr. Google and I have diagnosed myself with this thing because of X, Y, and Z. I would like you to check these things.
Right.
And I learned early on that I'm always right. Not because I corrected my teacher when she called the guitar a cello. Not for that reason, but because every time I'm like, those sound very familiar. Let me go do some research. Those symptoms sound familiar. And I do the research, I present it, they test me, and lo and behold.
Right.
I seem to always have that thing. And
you're not talking about going WebMD, okay, diagnosis. You're talking about months sometimes of in-depth research in scientific journals.
Right. And talking to people who have been officially diagnosed with those things. Yeah. Or yes, I don't mean I was like, what are the symptoms for heat rash? And was like, shit, I have some weird, crazy, obscure disease that is only found in a snail's shell in this random country. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about PCOS, endometriosis, all of those things that had a lot that I could work with. But even still, for me, that became a problem when I was sitting in my, just to be clear, I flunked out of college. So, we're going to be real about that for a minute. I went to college. I took my first psychology class. 2 weeks in, I had a nervous breakdown and had to drop out of college because I realized in the middle of class that everything I thought was normal was actually psychologically related illnesses.
Right. Was something that was called a disorder, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that you're a defective human being.
Well, and I finally realized, no one else is neurotic and feels like someone's coming to chase them and murder them like a Lifetime movie. I might need a little help. There are, I don't know where I was going on that tangent. Self-diagnosis is important, I think, is where I was going with that, is because you know yourself and your thought patterns and your things, and you can find some parallels between things. And presenting information at the doctor, psychologist, neuroscientist, whatever, presenting the information, you might not have the accurate diagnosis, but the fact that you identified these symptoms or ways of doing things might actually give them enough information to help you find the thing that you need.
Right.
I think that's what my point was.
Right. And if they tell you that there's something going on, it's okay to go and research it and understand it and then go back and say, I need more on this. Yes, I agree that this is happening, but this is also happening, XYZ. And can we look at that? That is absolutely okay as well. And, you know, to your speaking about everything having to be pathologized, right? Like, as a sexologist, sex has been pathologized. Like, I don't remember what year, it's not been very long ago that homosexuality was a disorder in the DSM.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there were medically sanctioned cures for homosexuality. Some of those, basically, you know, conversion therapy and all of these things, you know, they kind of use the same thing with neurodivergence. Yeah. They're still using shock treatment in some cases. It is still legal in some cases. For anybody who wants to go look at that, go look at ASON, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. They have a lot of information about that. We can put the link in there.
Yeah, well. I mean, it was offered to me for my Tourette's to help with my tics. Right.
Right. And so, and we're pathologizing this. Like, that doesn't fit into the norm of society. Therefore, we're going to do this thing to completely change you. It's like, that doesn't need to happen. So, you know, let's look at that. And there again, there's another overlap, right? Like, more overlaps. So, okay. One of the studies, because you know me, I like to provide resources. So one of the things, and this article, the name of it is The Sexual Health, Orientation, and Activity of Autistic Adolescents and Adults. Says, sexual education and sexual health screenings of all children, adolescents, and adults, including autistic individuals, must remain priorities. Healthcare professionals should use language that affirms a diversity of sexual orientations and supports autistic individuals who may have increased risks affecting mental health, physical health, and healthcare quality due to stress and discrimination from this intersectionality. Yay! Yeah. There it is, folks. There's some science there speaking to the importance of sexual education and sexual health discussions happening for autistic folks. Yes. And let's just say ADHD and all of the different things, they need to have that. But autism is the neurodivergence that many people look at and say they are not sexual.
Sorry, didn't mean to laugh.
Right? Right. They say they're not sexual, but we are. Like, right. And the fact is that many of us do not identify as heterosexual. Whether it's the prefrontal cortex or something in our brains, or just the fact that we are like, it's okay to not fit into this norm. That's not harming anything or anybody.
Right. Well, and I've had a lot of conversations with people like or read a lot of things and had conversations. Neurodivergence is what moves us as a rate, like a human people. forward, because outside the box thinking, not keeping the status quo, like we do not follow the herd. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it makes absolute sense on that same line of thinking that we go, I don't care about the fucking rules. I'm just going to be myself and love who I want to love. Like that makes a lot of sense in that same frame of thinking of challenging. We've done it this way forever. Kind of thinking. So that makes my logical brain is going, yes, that makes lots of sense.
Yeah, like duh. Like, you know, like I was, like I was saying earlier, like it never made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, there were so many things that never made sense to me. Now, I didn't lock on to I knew I was ADHD at 22 is when I was diagnosed. But then there was that label that was there, and I didn't look any further. It was everything. It was like, oh, well, that's because I'm ADHD. Oh, that's because I'm ADHD. That's because I'm ADHD. And I didn't dive further into any of it, whether it was sexuality or sensory needs or relationships or whatever. And so, yeah. Anyway, I don't think that that's exactly on topic. Let me bring this other one back. Okay. Brief report. Sexual orientation in individuals with autistic traits. Population-based study of 47,000 adults in Stockholm County. Participants with autistic traits were more likely to identify as bisexual and to feel that their sexual orientation could neither be described as hetero, homo, nor bisexual, compared to individuals without autistic traits. Autistic traits are associated with minority sexual orientation and perhaps with uncertain self-identification and or a defiance of traditional ways of categorizing sexual identity.
I really hate the word defiance in these situations, but
right. We have to take the academic language that is being used sometimes and take a step back away from it and say, but what is the overall meaning here?
Right.
And number one, I liked this because it was people. It wasn't you have to prove that you are or you're not. Is people say. They identified certain traits within individuals, and then they said these traits are autistic traits, and people who have these traits, whether they're diagnosed or not, also tend more to queerness because we are defiant of traditional ways of categorizing anything within our identity, I would say. So I liked that article for that conversation.
Yes. I'm so hyper focused on the word defiant right now. I cannot not. Because it's like, yeah, I totally chose that because I'm trying to piss you off. Like, you know, like.
Right.
Not that I don't use the word defiant occasionally to describe certain behaviors my child is making, but at the same time, like reading it in this scenario, I'm just like, or hearing it. Also, auditory processing disorder. So it was probably the only word I heard you say.
Oh, right. And then you stuck on it.
Yes.
So, that's what happens.
But in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to try and get myself back on track here. I do appreciate this intersectionality that they're acknowledging.
Right.
Because like we've said over and over again this episode, like it is super important to acknowledge any intersectionality, all of them.
Absolutely.
Not just one of them, all of them.
All of them.
And it's like Angela mentioned, like there's no one reason this is the way it is. Like it is always a million different layers that affects things. I was listening to another TikToker. I think it's funny. I used to like despise TikTok, and now every reference I have is TikTok. Bite-sized moments in between, dealing with toddlerness. So I was listening to a TikToker, and she was like talking about, because she's an autistic person, and she said that she hates when people are like, well, what happened right before the meltdown to cause your meltdown? And she's like, it has nothing to do with the moment right before my meltdown. It has to do with the moment that happened 3 days ago. That was the starting point. And then it all just layered on. And then eventually I just ran out of all my skills and I had a meltdown. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. Because when we're trying to help Blaine, I'm always like, okay, what was happening leading up to? Like, I don't usually think it's like the thing right before it. I usually feel like there was something leading up to it. But like, it could be from 3 days ago or a week ago or something that's stuck in their brain from 5 weeks ago.
Probably not one specific thing. It's usually not.
Right.
It's usually not.
Half the time when I'm having a meltdown in the middle of the kitchen screaming at everybody, it's because I didn't get any sleep. Nothing's going right. We're in Mercury retrograde. Like, whatever. Sure. I know you don't. I like to blame Mercury retrograde for a lot of things because it makes me feel better. The tech isn't working. They had Blaine had a bad day. Partner had a bad day. Everybody needs me to make decisions. I'm decision fatigued. Like, if anybody adds one more fucking thing, I'm going to lose it. And then I lose it. Yeah. And then everybody's getting screamed at in the kitchen. That's about how it works.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, and understanding our sexuality can be one of those things. Mm-hmm. Right? If you have spent your entire life pretending to fit into this, following the heteronormative narrative, if you've spent your entire life there, but that's not who you actually are, and you are not able to express, you can be in a very happy, loving, fulfilling partnership with another person. And still, if you are not allowed to acknowledge your true self, that is a stressor. And then other stressors are building up on top of that. Right? And the same with how our brains work. When you pretend, so people used to ask me, we'd walk down the hall and people would say, how are you? And I'd be like, I'm fantastic. I refuse to be any other way. And I said it just like that every single time. Every single time I said it just like that. I'm fantastic and I refuse to be any other way. And people loved that response, right? They loved that. I smiled and I'm bebopping around. Hi, that's not actually who I am. I'm actually kind of melancholic a lot of the time. And when you spend years and years and years pretending that part of you isn't there, you're denying part of yourself, and it becomes overwhelming and you get exhausted. And it's why not only because we're having more conversations about, people are like, autism is more prevalent now than before. Well, no, it's not. It's just we're having these conversations. We know more. People are starting to feel safe having that conversation, understanding themselves. And, and people are saying, oh, and there's more gay people than ever before. No, there's not. Exactly the same thing that I just said. No, there's not. But we are in a different space having that different conversation. So yeah, you might see more people having that conversation and more people being diagnosed or identifying as or being open about it, because we're tired of pretending to be somebody who we're not. We're tired.
Right.
And when you have multiple things happening, like many of us do, each one of those is a layer of stress in a society that doesn't allow you to be who you are. Yeah. So when something small happens, like you have a bad day, it is much more difficult to address that because you're also fighting all of those other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I have another resource. I know we need to be done soon, but I have another resource, and this is a book that people may want to read. It's called Uncomfortable Labels. Uncomfortable Labels: My Life as a Gay, Autistic, Trans Woman. Laura Kate Dale is the author. And she says, my hope is that by the time you're done reading, you'll have a better sense of how autism and LGBT status overlap. Perhaps understand better why people in both camps might struggle to fulfill the stereotypes of how they are meant to act, and maybe know a bit more about how to support people like me who just want to get on with living our lives, even if we're a little out of step with those around us.
Now I know what I'm getting at the library.
Right, and the link for that will be in the notes as well. Yes.
Okay. Ooh, we covered a lot of ground.
We did. And you definitely got me going on things that I am passionate about because, number one, I am fired up right now.
I can feel it. I was like, I'm super ticky today. But I don't know if anybody else with Tourette's has this, but like the energy from the other person essentially like triggers all of these ticks within your body. Like that's how mine is. So anyway. Yes. So Angela, you did the closing. I don't do the closing.
Oh my gosh. Doing the closing. I didn't even think about the closing. Okay, yes.
Okay,
we have to do the closing, and but before that, okay. Why is it important to you that people understand the overlap or the link between sexuality and neurodivergence?
Okay. So for me, it's important because you're acknowledging the true authentic self for that individual. And when we do that, that person is able to not be overwhelmed or stressed by trying to be something so that the other person can understand them. And it allows them to focus on whatever the situation is at hand instead of trying to be like, how do I handle the situation and be something that I'm not to handle the situation to make that person comfortable. And I feel like for us being super vocal, that allows other people to realize that they don't have to continue being who they are not. And that's usually why every time I'm like at a meeting, I'm like, hi, I help queer folks. Because just by saying queer folks, people are like, what's happening? So,
right.
So, okay. What about you? What do you?
Yeah. I mean, it's important that people see themselves, right? It's important that people see themselves and are able to ask questions and engage in the conversation, but also maybe bring awareness to something that is there, but maybe people don't know. What would have happened if I would have had conversations 20 years ago about the way I process the world around me? What would have happened? Who knows?
I think, yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
Things. I'm like, oh well.
Right. So for me, that's why it's important, because I want people younger than I am. I want parents. I want everybody to question everything. Ask the questions. Engage in the conversation. Send us questions on our Ask Us Anything link. All of that. Okay. So time to go. Anything else before we go?
Come back next week.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to Drudgery, Dreams, and In Between, a weekly live podcast coming to you every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. PST. Subscribe now wherever podcasts are found. If you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to leave a rating and review and share with your friends. To catch all the latest from us, visit us at drudgeryanddreams.com and follow on your favorite social media platforms at Drudgery and Dreams. Thanks again. See you next time.